One of the local weathermen said that this area is more prone to tornadoes than the Tornado Alley out in the Midwest. I don't know if that's true or not, but we do know because it is a plain and I guess the weather pattern, the middle section of the United States, the plain states, are prone to large, sudden, violent tornadoes, right? I read about one such storm, and it bore down on this farmhouse out in the middle of the country, and this older, middle-aged farming couple were home in bed, and when that tornado hit, it ripped the roof off that house and just sucked them out, bed and all, carried them 2 or 3 miles down and just sat them down again completely unharmed. Well, the wife, she just began to sob unconsolably, and the husband was trying to comfort her and said, now, honey, we're okay, we're fine, God's taking care of us, there's not a scratch on us. And she looked at him through tears and says, oh, honey, I know, but it just reminded me we hadn't been out together anywhere in the last 5 years. Well, I don't think the disciples were worried about going out anywhere, but they did get caught in one of these sudden, violent storms that the Sea of Galilee is so prone for. And there's a good reason for that. The area is 680 feet below sea level. It is almost tropical in its climate, and it's called the breadbasket of Galilee. But just to the north and northeast are the Golden Heights. And if you go to the far end of the Golden Heights, you have Mount Hermon, which is normally snow-capped. And if you'll look this up on a map that shows pictures of the terrain, then there are gullies and valleys that come down to the Sea of Galilee. And because of the change in temperature, sudden violent winds come rushing down those ravines. Now, picture this in your mind. The wind is going parallel to the ground, but it's a mountainside. Down here is the Sea of Galilee, this little lake. Most of the time, water has a tendency to sit in a lake kind of flat, right? Okay. Here the wind comes down. Wind can churn water anyway, but what if it hits it at an angle? Boy, it can get violent quickly. And I want to point out some things to you here that the New Testament writers say about this particular storm. Luke says a storm of wind came down on the sea. Guess what? A storm of wind came down on the sea. At one moment, there was tranquility. At the next moment, there was this vicious storm. And what a storm. Luke calls it a whirlwind of a storm. Now, what would we call a whirlwind of a storm? Tornado. Maybe on the water, a water spout. I don't know about you, but if I was in a 12, 15-foot boat, and here came a tornado or a water spout, I would be a little bit uneasy, wouldn't you? But it gets even worse. Mark is the only one that really uses the word mega, great. And he says this was a mega whirlwind of a storm. Matthew, on the other hand, is describing the tumult, I think is what the King James says, and he uses the word seismos. We have borrowed from that. What is a seismograph or seismology? Study those earthquakes. So he is describing the sea as though there's an earthquake going on. I mean, there's wind on top and waves on bottom. This is some more storm that has bore down upon them. And they come to Jesus, waking him up. Now, we read this and we take it for granted, but now think about this. And I think it means more than just his trust. How tired would you have to be to sleep through a storm like that in a little old 12 or 15-foot boat? I mean, I just imagine that thing is going, don't you? Have you ever been on a cruise ship when it's pretty stormy? Did you sleep through it? I mean, man, we were on one, and it wasn't that bad to me, but there were people running around with those Dramamine patches. Some of them had 2 on, I think. What does it mean? Not just his trust in the Father, although I don't want to downplay that. Jesus must have been exhausted. I've been tired a few times in my life. I don't think I've ever been that tired. He was worn out. But they come to him and they said, Jesus, don't you care that we are perishing? Does not say we're in danger of perishing. Present, active. We are, right now, perishing. Well, Jesus gets up, brushes the sleep from his eyes. Now, I've told you this before. Literally, he says, be muzzled. That's a Hebrew expression. For us, he's looking at the wind. And he says, shut up. And when Jesus tells the wind to shut up, guess what it does? It shuts up. And Mark says there was this mega storm, and the New American Standard says perfectly calm, but he uses the same word. There was a mega calm. I have seen the Sea of Galilee. In the morning that I saw it, there was barely a ripple on its surface. And that's what it's describing. Just as quickly as the storm fell on them, it was gone. Now, some writers are quick to point out that these nature miracles are less frequent than the healing miracles. But it does display, without a doubt, the power of God. And I want you to understand that anytime we look at a miracle, it is a literal miracle. It is real. There was a real storm, a real boat, real waves. But this moves beyond the historical event, and Jesus is trying to teach us something. We're not real fond of metaphors today. A lot of people don't understand metaphors. Last night on Pawn Stars, Hoss was trying to teach Chumney about a metaphor with his sandwich, and he said, well, it tastes like a sandwich to me. We don't get metaphors, but we get one metaphor. We talk about the storms of life, and we understand that, right? And we begin to apply this passage to the storms of life that we face, and I think that's what he means for us to do. But consider what this passage has to say to us this morning. First of all, it points to the fact of fear. And did you ever stop to think that some fear is really a good thing? Fear's good. You ever heard anybody say, I don't know the meaning of fear? Probably a lot of other words that person doesn't understand either then, right? I am afraid to go down Patrick Road at 100 miles an hour. Some people aren't, and they do it. I don't know if they were speeding last night, don't know what happened, but one was on its roof and had to be airlifted. I am afraid to take an igniter and check and see how much gasoline is in my lawnmower. You see, to be without fear is not an indication necessarily of bravery, but of absolute foolishness. God has given us the ability to be afraid of certain things, and the wise man said, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I know, I have researched it myself, it means reverence. But I also think it has an element of just fear to it as well. Now, you may disagree with me. I know perfect love casts out fear, but I also know my own life. And when I was 12 and 13 years old and I knew everything about everything, sometimes my mama would say something to me and I'd mouth off to her. And I'd get by with it if I was out of reach. But you know I didn't do that with my daddy? You know why I didn't do that with my daddy? He'd have smacked me silly. There was that element of fear. And yes, it was reverence, but I think the beginning reverence is knowing that, hey, you keep misbehaving as God's children, He's going to spank you. Some fear is good. But so much fear is just running rampant, and it's misplaced. The poor are afraid they're going to lose what little they have and not have the next meal. The wealthy are even more afraid that they're going to lose what they have. Middle-aged adults are afraid for their parents and what's going to happen to them. We're afraid for ourselves. We're afraid for our children. What kind of world are these younger folks going to inherit? We're afraid of the present. We're even more afraid of the future. Wasn't long ago that it looked like we were headed for world peace. Now we're being told that we live in the most dangerous time that America's ever seen. We're afraid for ourselves. But think about the absolute futility of fear. When it comes down to it, it is a waste of energy and a waste of time. One thing that makes fear so bad, you can't be really afraid and do much of anything else. Just like you can't be really mad and do much of anything else. Right? You ever been so think straight you couldn't mad right? I mean, it just consumes, so does fear. It overtakes us. And we fear and we fret over things that most of the time never happen. Now, again, I don't know if this is scientific research or not, but I read that 90% of the things that we worry about never happen. 7% of the things that we worry about that do happen are completely out of our control. That leaves 3%. That means 90% of what we worry about is a waste of time. Read about this guy. He was just convinced that he was going to become paralyzed. He was paranoid. He'd tell his wife, I'm going to become paralyzed. And they were at a dinner party one night, and he leaned over and he said, honey, we've got to go. It's finally happened. I'm paralyzed. And she said, what on earth makes you think you're paralyzed? He said, I'm pinching my leg and I can't feel it. She said, you dummy, you're pinching my leg. We run around and we're afraid of things. It never happened. And you may think I'm crazy, but I want to tell you, all of the fear of the disciples here was unwarranted. Were they in a storm? Uh-huh. Were they in any real danger? Uh-uh. One reason I bet some of you have guessed, but another I want to point out to you in a moment. But Jesus was in that boat. So for that boat to go down, Jesus had to go down. Is Jesus going down? No. But there's something else. They ran to him and they said, don't you care that we are perishing? All three of the synoptics use the same word. And early on, it did mean die. But then, by the time of Mark, get this, it meant to be given over to eternal misery in hell. Were they ever in any danger of going to hell? Absolutely not. Fear makes you exaggerate your danger. And they were not in any real danger at all. And fear is creative. It'll create the very thing that you fear. There's an odd verse in the book of Job, in what it concludes. This is Job speaking. For what I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. Do you hear that? Job said the very thing that I've been afraid of all these years is what happened. Fear sometimes creates the problem. Also, if you run around saying that you're afraid of something, then, the devil hears it and he might give it to you. Fear is also contagious. Ever read the story of Chicken Little? Well, there's a biblical story that parallels it. The children of Israel are at Kadesh Barnea. They're ready to go in and claim the promised land. And they decide to appoint 12 spies to see how to take the land. The report comes back, yep, just like God said. Isn't that amazing? They say, oh, there's giants in there. And that's a land that eats up its inhabitants. We can't take it. And fear runs rampant through the entire encampment of Israel. It's contagious. It's paralyzing. Can you imagine the scene here? Latter part of verse 37, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. I think it's Matthew that tells us they were rowing hard, but they wasn't getting anywhere. So they went and woke Jesus up. Now let's read between the lines just a little bit. If they were rowing hard and they went to Jesus, then they quit rowing, didn't they? They gave up. And they abandoned the rowing. I remember years ago reading a story about a man that was needing to cross a river, and it was in the middle of the winter and it was frozen. And he started out across the river. Have you ever been on a large body of frozen water? Man, it can make some weird noises. He started out through there and it was popping and a moaning and a groaning. And he got out a little ways and he got afraid. So he decided that he would